This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I am your host, Jamie Wood, and our topic today is a bit of an interesting one. I'm actually going to go back, and I normally hate when podcasts do this, but bear with me. I'm going to go back and rebroadcast, not a podcast I did, but a podcast that I was actually interviewed on back in 2019. And it was actually probably about a week, maybe 2 weeks before the Media Sales Mastery podcast dropped. The reason why I want to go back and revisit this was the time where I was promoting the podcast. I was speaking about the reason why I created the podcast. And it's just a good kind of moment in time to go back and revisit. It was on a podcast that most people who know Media Sales Mastery will be familiar with called Killer Media Sales. And if you haven't had a listen to that podcast, go back and trawl through their back catalogue because it is exceptionally good stuff. It's very different to what I do. It's a little bit more short form, a little bit more tactical, very, very specifically related to the trade media. But I've become good mates with the guys who host it, Alex and Russ. They run a fantastic business in momentum media. So it's very much about going back and having a listen. And there's a reason I wanted to do that, right? Because in 2024, I'm kind of asking myself the question, what am I doing with this podcast? Why am I continuing to do it? It is a lot of work. It's a lot of scheduling. It's a lot of designing the content. I'll admit sometimes my energy and effort is not as good as it could be. And sometimes I feel like I really sort of bring the A game. But what I want to do is revigorate and revitalize the podcast this year. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to be designing the episodes and the sequence of the episodes into a structured 20-episode curriculum. So the objective is basically to give a really comprehensive overview of the function of media sales, but to kind of dive into specific facets in detail, but to do it in a way that's very, very linear, that makes sense. You know, how do you learn your product? How do you develop your proposition? How do you prospect? How do you build your proposals? How do you pitch? How do you do the post-sales fulfillment? How do you do the professional development? How do you deal with politics? It's no accident that there's all those P's there. I've kind of struck upon a bit of a theme here, but you can see how that all kind of logically flows to the next topic. So the reason why I've decided to do this and the reason why I wanted to go back and rebroadcast the 2019 episode was because A, it's a lot easier to produce and I need to get a few podcasts out, but B, because I wanted to really stay true to the initial reason I created the podcast, right? Which was I wanted to create something that I wish I had access to when I was 23, starting out in my career, right? And I think that if I had the Media Sales Mastery podcast when I was 23, I would have felt less stressed, less alone, less naive. I would have felt like I had more control. I would have felt like I had more energy, more enthusiasm, and I would have felt better equipped to just manage the stress and the anxiety and the emotional toll that dealing with this industry can actually have on you at times. So that's what I am going to set as the intention. That's what I'm committing to deliver for the year ahead. But right now, we're going to go back and listen to a 2019 episode of Killer Media Sales, where I give a little bit of context as to the initial reason why I've created this podcast and who specifically I was wanting to serve with it. Enjoy, and I look forward to having a great year of hopefully some really nice growth in the download and the listenership of the podcast.
Welcome to Killer Media Sales, the podcast for the world's top media salespeople.
Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Alex Whitlock. Bit of a different heartbeat today. For those of you that listened to last week's podcast, we're pretty focused. Myself and Russ sort of went into quite a lot of detail and quite a lot of depth about tactics for selling, features and the importance of that in terms of revenue. I happen to be catching up with a friend of mine, Jamie Wood. For those of you not familiar with Jamie is sales director with ARN up in Brisbane. He's also just recently launched a podcast, which I personally really enjoy, and I've had the privilege of being on, called Media Sales Mastery. So great to catch up. Jamie.
Good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Before we get sort of stuck into our general chat, look, just give us a bit of an overview about about Media Sales Mastery, about why you launched this podcast and what listeners can get from it.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think it initially came, as we've spoken about many times, from my frustration of just not having any content for people who do what we do in media sales. And I made the point of saying on many occasions that, our industry of media and advertising, you've got so many trade publications, so much content for marketers, for people in advertising. But then the other side of the market, the other 50% of people in the industry were very much neglected. And so I think what spawned me to do it was one, for my own needs and my own interest of just wanting to create something that I knew would have some utility for people in the first 5 years of media. And the approach was really interesting because I actually had a really extensive survey that I put out. So a lot of my peers or my colleagues who also work as sales directors, I said, look, can you send this out to anyone in your organization that's starting out? Those people in the first 2 to 5 years are where we see a lot of attrition in this industry. And we know the reason for that. There's no formal qualification for it. It's revenue-related pressure from day one, and you somewhat have to learn by failing. So it's the perfect environment for somebody to feel overwhelmed and to feel like they're not really, mastering the skill set of media sales. So, we sent out the survey, we created the content, and it was very much around going, well, for somebody who's 1 year in, for somebody who's 5 years in, how do we create content that is just going to make people feel less alone, have something that's instantly applicable for them on on an immediate basis? What can I apply right now that's going to give me an edge this week? And then more importantly, how do we create a bit of a community around this so that the content we create actually becomes what the audience want to hear about and what are some of the challenges they're having. So I think, very lucky to have people like yourself be so enthusiastic to contribute.
Oh, absolutely. I think podcasts, look, such as this, such as yours, and these are very different. This is a chat. This is very informal. Yours is very structured, and I believe you're sort of coming to the end of season 1. Look, for people who are listening in, where can they find it, Jamie?
Look, really anywhere. iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify. So Media Sales Mastery, anywhere you want to find it, or mediasalesmastery.com is the website.
I recommend, whether you're new in the business or whether you've been there for some time. Look, I've been in media sales for nearly 25 years. I got great value out of that, so check it out. And you know what? I think this is a good extension to really carry on our chat today. It's we've all worked, and do work in media sales. And I started out selling print adverts some 20 odd years ago, and media sales and the media environment has changed radically and continues to change at pace now. How do you, with your guys, in broadcast, again, it isn't just a matter of selling slots on radio shows for advertising. Your area of broadcast has changed radically.
Look, I've been doing this for 10 years and I can genuinely say it is becoming increasingly complex with every year. Normally you get a lot more competent at a job. I often feel like I'm sort of learning and starting fresh every year because what we're doing these days is somewhat having to protect our core revenue base, be it radio, but then also look to future-proof. So to have an understanding of what are those new emerging platforms that we need to actually go and build or that we need to incorporate as part of our client solutions. And how do we balance those somewhat divergent priorities when there's only so many hours in the day?
So for your guys, Jamie, where is the main threat externally to the revenue that's been, generally secured through the radio stations?
Well, I think the main threat is somewhat accelerated by our own industry, if that makes sense. So if we think about this great podcast we're doing here, we certainly have to make a play into the podcasting space. Now, it's not going to be the be-all and end-all, but it is an important, platform that we need to start to have a play in because it's what our core business is audio content. Yeah. So to some extent, I hate to say it, I think our biggest threat is actually our own, I'm not going to say paranoia, but our own need to future-proof our business by somewhat cannibalizing our business as well. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Ross, you've been working in media now for 18 years, I would say.
Yeah, about 18.
You've seen, I think you very much the same as me, it was print media when you started out. You've obviously seen great transformation. You're very hands-on with our sales team.
I think going back to what you were saying earlier, Jamie, as well, when you first start out in sales, there is so much content out there that you can sort of read, so many books, but the amount of times I've been on different sales training courses and it just doesn't apply to media, and I think having that specific content that can help people is absolutely key. So spotting the opportunity is excellent. I think interesting for me as well, you're right, I started 18 years ago print only, and just recently sort of got back involved in some direct selling with the launch of a new event, and it's really quite interesting to sort of listen to potential clients and understand what they really want to sort of get out of a partnership these days. And, for so long, it's been quite transactional. It's been you can buy some inventory, you can buy a sponsorship, and But I think now that just people just don't want to have that conversation. It's so one-dimensional. People they one-stop shop where you can provide all of that sort of inventory available. We can do some audio, we can do some video, we can really sort of get into what their strategies and what they're trying to achieve and how we can play a role within that for them. And it's less about, hey, give me X thousands of dollars, we'll put a logo up and we're going to have a few people in the room for you.
Well, you touch on a good point there, because I completely agree. I know when we talk about our asset base getting infinitely more complex and having more tools in the kit bag, that's a good thing, but it poses challenges at the same time.
Yes.
And I think when we talk about, media sales, fundamentally the brilliant basics are still applicable in today versus 10 versus 20 years ago. The number one thing is a knowledge of the client, their industry, and their objectives.
Yeah.
Unless you have that, unless you lead with that, you don't have the ability to then pull in your asset base and create a solution. So I think in many ways, the people who are going to win are the ones who invest time to know the category they're selling into, to know the market, to forge those relationships, to have a deep understanding of the client objectives, but then to have a really good knowledge of their product base as well. And what you're saying there about multi-platform, to some extent, I think clients will be looking for one key supplier that they can actually do that whole range of different things with. So it is an opportunity as well.
Yeah.
I think if whether you're new to media sales, whether you're looking to join the profession, I like to think of it as, or whether you've been there for years and years and years, there are just some fundamental things that really forge, looking at what success looks like for salespeople and also for the clients is something I'm constantly fascinated with. And I think to be successful in media sales, you're absolutely right. Understand the client, understand their objectives, understand the product, understand their audience. But I think there's also things, it's that ability to communicate yourself. In one of your podcasts, I was listening to the lady from Icon. One thing she articulated so well about that warmth, about that connection. And I think in media sales now, even though you're quite right, there are a bewildering number of tools and also expectations, but the fundamentals still, still stay true. Being a clear communicator yourself, having integrity, making a human connection with the people you're working with, wanting to share in the success of your clients, but also fundamentally understanding and identifying in a pragmatic way what that success looks like. So in essence, it is simple. And I think if you grasp the simple fundamentals, the more complex tools around the periphery suddenly become easier to get. You're picking up the tools rather than sort of getting confused by various metrics and different kind of expectations and so forth.
You're exactly right. To the actual counterpoint of that, and I had a beer with a good friend of mine. He's the sales director of ATN, so Australian Traffic Network, who do the traffic reports. And I said to him, if you think about how the market is operating at the moment, they want speed, they want cost efficiency in terms of reach, they want ease of transaction. You've got a lot that falls into your sweet spot. And he said, well, our biggest challenge, openly, is that we don't have new products or platforms, so we don't have that innovation story to go and sell to market.
Yeah, right.
And I said, well, that's an interesting point. That is one thing that's really fortunate that we have in this world of these new media platforms. There's always a new reason to get in front of an advertiser, to keep them engaged, to give them a new story. And I think with every interaction you do where you bring a new product, you deepen your knowledge of the client and their objectives as well.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting you said, Alex, obviously you can get confused and sort of overwhelmed with sort of the amount that you've got to sell or the inventory that you have or the options available to clients. But I think, key time management, on a day-to-day basis, week to week, in terms of how you're doing that is critical to success as well.
One of the biggest pitfalls I've found over the years is about focus. And I don't just mean in terms of how you organise your day and what your priorities are. And the reason why I say focus is critical, because if I, as a salesperson, aren't able to focus on what success looks like, media is confusing also for the people who buy media, and you can end up with junior people who actually they can get confused about, kind of click-throughs and return on investment and, sort of getting various other things that if you can't help them focus on what the outcomes are from spending, this very valuable revenue with us, if you can't get those people to focus on that, then you're going to lose the value of what, this is where you end up in the quagmire of looking at metrics and judging something for the sake of metrics. I think being able to crystallize as a salesperson and I believe very strongly in leading as a salesperson. You need to lead. That doesn't mean to be a driving force against somebody else's will, but you need to bring the client and to get from the client to understand what those objectives are. If you're dealing with a junior marketing person in an organization who isn't really clear, then before you start getting down to sort of selling tactics, you've got to get them to understand, or maybe speak to somebody more senior to understand what the objectives are. And when you're aligned in terms of objectives, and one of the things that Russ Easter, who we did the course with recently, is understand the customer journey and where you fit in to that journey, and how you can play a role in that journey. And you know what, and how you may be able to work alongside, not directly, but with others in your space. As long as you can fulfill your part of that journey and give value to the client, then that's a successful conversation to have.
I remember catching his podcast, and I think he's absolutely correct in what he says. My side of the fence in terms of broadcast media and selling primarily into that agency market, you raise an interesting point around measurement, around metrics. To some extent, I think you've got people in free-to-air television, in radio, or audio as it's more broadly referred to, in out-of-home, very much investing in new measurement tools and ways to quantify what it is they're delivering to advertisers. I don't think anyone's got it figured out.
No.
And that's where we've got to be comfortable, is to work in the grey. But I agree with you around market leadership is really important in times like this. What is the actual currency? It's not about us marking our homework, but we understand how our audience is engaged. Let's talk about what we actually think a metric of success should be here if we're talking about these hard KPIs. Because at the end of the day, the commercial return is really the objective we're all striving for.
Of course, yeah. And I think in an increasingly confusing world that we all live in, but looking at media within that, it's the same within media. There are so many confusing metrics. I think if you can offer clarity about the fundamentals, and I think always for me, sales has to be about success for the client. And if you can crystallize that down to, to get them to focus on what the outcomes are and what you can tangibly deliver, or how you can get towards that. And there may be a number of different objectives in a pyramid in terms of what the client wants to achieve. There's always going to be a pinnacle about the most important thing, and I think really getting that and getting the spotlight on the most important outcome, and then looking at the sort of the tiered levels down. It may be that I want to repurpose content, or I want to build somebody's name, or build a brand, or reintroduce a product. But it's really about getting down to that pinpoint, shine a light on it. And I think that's the key to, and then also connecting on a human level, demonstrating that you're going to be trustworthy, that you're going to be reliable, that you're going to deliver things as and when they're expected. So I think...
Well, I actually think, it's funny, hearing you say that and hearing me reflecting on my experience, which is arguably very different, but still in the same, the same discipline of media sales. I actually think you might have the hardest gig of all, Russ, in terms of that event space.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
No, I would think, look, we certainly dabble in the event space. Obviously, it's a big part of what we do, but we often do it as an extension to a campaign. We don't do it as a standalone proposition. Now, I'm not sure whether that's what you do either, but when we talk about metrics of success, an event is somewhat, I would imagine, a bit intangible.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it is a tough nut to crack, because the event that Russ is working on is a brand new event. It's never been done before. It's going to be something nationwide. We've got pedigree here in doing very successful events. But you're absolutely right. And this is really challenging as a salesperson to go along and approach, some very, very major brands in real estate in this instance, to give them some assurances, because they want to know how many people are going to turn up, who are the speakers going to be, what's the content, what's the value to the audience, what am I going to get out of it, and you're absolutely right, Jamie. Certainly selling an event that's been around for a few years is easier, but going out with a concept and painting a picture of an activity that hasn't yet happened is challenging.
It is. You paint that individual activity, but I also think it's, for a lot of the people I'm talking to, it starts with the event, but it's a much more strategic long-term partnership, and how that's going to, sort of the event will play as part of, reaching those long-term goals and objectives with the other stuff we're going to do with them, and we'll bring them inside the tent and, work with our editorial team, and we'll get a lot closer to their business and see where those opportunities are. But I think if you're going in there one-dimensional, just trying to sell the event, you're only going to get so far. You'll get some smaller groups, but the big guys now, they want a lot more. They want multi-layered campaigns across different sort of media platforms, and they want to know that you're going to support them over the course of a 6 or 12 month period, or even longer. And it's not a case of, you're going to work with us on this event and our logo goes up and we're going to get X hundreds of people in the room for you. So
right,
I was going to say, one of the things, going off a little bit of a tangent, but sort of while you guys are talking, I'm sort of thinking about what is in the DNA of a successful media salesperson, and it's something that is interesting because often, certainly in our organisation, we have people who don't have previous media experience. You're selling something, I think, being involved, working in the media, whether it's broadcast, whether it's digital, whether it's print, whether it's events, or whether it's a combination of the whole of them. I find working with content, working with journalists, working with information, working with the speed of delivery of information, just for me, it's changed my life. Going from retail in the UK to getting a chance to work at the media, it's been absolutely unbelievable. So I think that in terms of success as being a media salesperson, when you feel that heartbeat around working in the media, that for me, it makes me get up every single morning. I think also that you start to look at the skills and the particularly unique skill set in terms of sales. I think you've got to have, some things, run true with any kind of sales role, integrity, accuracy, honesty, sort of sharing the vision. But I think also you've got to be very nimble, because you're not selling a widget.
A tangible product.
Yeah,
you're
and
exactly
I think sharing this real genuine passion for media, or broadcast, and having the wherewithal to be able to move reasonably deftly, in terms of seeing opportunity, but not getting swamped, as we said, by all the myriad of different tools and measures and opportunities.
Yeah, I think sort of, for me, like even going back to real basics, working in the media was exciting because you'd make it your own destiny as well. And I think now sort of, with all these different options available to you, you've got a real opportunity to work with clients. And we say, at a strategy level and being a media strategist, you generally get to do that. You get to, be part of their campaign, be part of their journey, really sort of handpick sort of, different items and bits and pieces for them that is going to help them get to their end goal. And going back to, when you've got an individual product and it's hey, look, we're selling this printer versus that printer and we give you a 12-month warranty versus this. Christ, that must be bloody soul destroying.
Well, yeah, you're in what I love about it, and just recently, I think Brisbane is an interesting market because a lot of our growth categories are professional services. So, retail, insurance, fast food, all that's traditionally been the bread and butter of broadcast media. But if you look into some of the like real estate, commercial real estate, property, finance, mining and resources, they're becoming very savvy and they're starting to have a really good eye on what are we doing at a content level, how are we taking a market leadership position, how are we engaging our stakeholders, probably more so than ever before. So, my view is that there's never been a better time to be in media, but ultimately if you want to, to adapt to this new media world, you have to have those inherent entrepreneurial traits. You can't sell a product anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really
you're selling opportunity, you're selling business growth. And I think you have to be, to your point about being pragmatic, I think what gets me out of bed in the morning is the same as you. I just love creating opportunities. And that could be anything from helping a small to medium advertiser, take a dip into media for the first time, or go and work in a really different category to what I'm used to and see if we can explore, where seemingly there might not be opportunity, where there would be an opportunity to create something.
Absolutely. I think, it gives you absolute freedom. I think, again, understanding your client, your customer, your prospect, seeing when sometimes deal with people who've got a very clear goal, very clear strategy. They understand fundamentally what their objectives are, and they also understand media. But you can often deal with people who have a notion that they can get success, but they don't know what that success looks like. And I think as a media salesperson, understanding and getting a quick measure of the level of competence, if you will, with the client. You don't want to end up bamboozling them with the size of the opportunity, knowing when to keep things nice and focused, knowing when you want to go and explore, knowing when you want to sort of where you can be trusted to lead them into areas, where there's opportunity, and not leading them down a blind alley where nobody quite knows where they're going.
That's a really good point you make, because when you deal with new clients and smaller clients that are dipping their toe into media, as a small business, when you're spending, your marketing dollars and it's hard earned, I think a lot of clients will think, well, if I'm going to do some advertising, oh my God, the phone's going to be ringing off the hook, and it's going to be amazing because you're putting me in front of all of these potential buyers of
mine. Because the audiences are huge. You've got huge audiences across your networks, and you start talking very, very big numbers.
And all of a sudden you think, oh my God, we're going to be inundated. And at the end of the day, they've still got to compete. They've still got to have the right messaging. They've still got to make sure they've got to build the brand, the product.
We as salespeople have no control over the product that's being marketed. This is one of the biggest things is, we are there to help put audience in front of them and to prepare them the very best we can in terms of their message. But at the end of the day, we have no control over their product, their service, and how they work with their customers. This is a big thing for salespeople to remember, that it's beyond our control.
Well, and I think that's, when we talk about probably a big thing around, and I mentioned off air around my podcast, is that you've got people that are fundamentally coming into this industry, learning what it is on the fly, having revenue-related pressure in most cases from day one, probably not getting access to the full amount of training that they would expect to get before they feel comfortable and confident. And they're out there having conversations with clients and they're going, well, I need to get a win on the board. I need to get a run on the board. I need to get the revenue in. What am I doing? So those quick wins can be very, very enticing. But to the point earlier, part of being a good media salesperson is having the discipline to actually play the long game and go, you know what? I'm going to do the activity, but I need to do this in a way that sets me up for sustainable client relationships, that is consultative. I don't want to take that $5,000 to $7,000 booking to the detriment of a $500,000 opportunity if I play this the right way.
Yeah.
That's the biggest pitfall. And every new media salesperson I train or I see come into our business, that's the one thing I say to them is, you've got a grace period with me. You need to make sure that you utilize that time to build the pipeline for the future.
Jamie, it's fantastic catching up with you again. Look, we're going to have to go because we're going to go out for some lunch.
Yeah, let's do it.
For everyone else, thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't checked out Jamie's podcast, please go check it out, Media Sales Mastery. Thanks very much for tuning in to Killer Media Sales. Great to have you with us. Keep those questions coming. Keen to answer, any of the thoughts you've got about media sales. Check out all the podcasts. They're all there on killermediasales.com. I'm your host, Alex Whitlock. Thanks for tuning in.